Hey friends, welcome back to Failure at Retirement. I've had some requests to review how I created some of my custom stuff. And one specifically was about this implement carrier and how this all came about. So I just got this idea that fifth wheel style implement carriers were pretty cool. This truck that I pulled out of the fire, it didn't have a trailer at all. So rather than try and find a Tonka trailer, I decided to create this implement carrier. And I don't recall having really any drawings or anything. I built this thing over 25 years ago, so somewhere between 25 and 30 years ago. So some of the details may be just a little sketchy at this point, so forgive me. But I believe that I just started just by scaling it, just measuring the fifth wheel height to make sure I had that down, measuring the axle height, so I kind of knew, how high the back axle was going to be compared to the fifth wheel, and to make sure that the top came out at least very, very close to level. So that was kind of step one. And then I believe from there, I kind of measured the width of the frame of the truck and just tried to keep the straddle buggy frame about the same width. And some of that was so that the track width on the rear wheels and tires, so that they ended up matching the truck. That was really kind of the goal there, and keeping the frame width the same. And then I just had some 1-inch channel iron. Guy usually has some 1-inch channel iron just laying around, scraps of it for one thing and another. Different stages of a guy's working career, he's kind of kept a little 1-inch channel around under the bench. So I fished that out, and guys always had a MIG welder, whether it was just at work or work and home or only home or whatever the case may be. I worked as a fabricator for a long time, guys, and I built untold amount of farm equipment, food processing equipment. Me and a crew working for me, and most of the time, literally we built millions of dollars worth of farm equipment. And so I welded these on the outside here, or technically the inside. No idea why I didn't take the time to get the berries off, but I guess I didn't feel like I had that much time. The inside here didn't weld because it's hard to sand that back out of there and make it look right. So I just got a good clean seam here, welded the other side, sanded her down. I drilled these holes in here, just to make her race car light. But really, honestly, a lot of it was just to give her some style. Just was a little too plain without them. And as far as like the angles here, front and back, the guy just kind of eyeballed that, and eyeballed the overhaul height against the cab, and just kind of whatever looked right. I wrote that all down on a piece of paper for reference. And then we needed some cross members, so I drilled those out again just for style, but then I put little holes on the outside so I'd have these cranks, which, by the way, don't really work. The guy just kind of got bored with it at that point. But what needed to happen is I need to probably tack weld or braze these chains onto these cranks, and then I need to somehow have some sort of stop here. But these cranks, they'll turn. So if a guy wants to make her work, all you gotta do is weld the chain on there and create some kind of stop to keep it from freewheeling back down. And you literally have a working rig. And I don't know what happened to the other push nut there. It must have fell off at some point in time. The whole thing just kind of tack welded together with the MIG welder, and some of the welds on some of these corners and stuff sanded down smooth so you don't see them. But it's just pretty simple. Like, I don't know, I think I did this maybe at work and just kind of knocked her out, you know, after work one day, just stayed an extra hour or whatever it took, I don't know. Made the 5th wheel plate here out of a couple of washers and I don't know, a chunk of rod, I think. Looking at it. Yeah, I think just a couple washers there and a chunk of rod. Made that 5th wheel plate. If I got her long enough, it's just not going to come out. Anyway, sometime I'll probably let the grandkids play with this as long as they're old enough, or maybe I'll have to do something about the eye pokers on the back there, I don't know. Anyway, while I was at it, I figured maybe I'd talk about this a little bit too. Someone made a comment about soldering that lid on there, and honestly, soldering's a challenge for me too, always has been, and I know it was a challenge getting her on there and getting her that clean, I remember that, but how I actually did it, I don't know. But the tank, it's just a piece of thin wall tubing, muffler tubing or something along them lines. And I think, I'm not sure about this, but I think I put it in a press. And I put the seam down on the bottom where it wouldn't show at all, because the seam is not going to bend even like the rest of it. So I think I just put it in this press and just kind of crushed her down in between probably a couple boards or something to keep the pressure kind of even. Just crushed her down till I got the oval shape that I was looking for. And you know, there was maybe a little hammering involved. I don't really remember. I do remember on the ends, I wanted to dome the ends some, because any good water tank, that's the way it would be, so they don't oil can on you. So I don't remember exactly what it was, like maybe a sandbag, or we had something around the shop that was soft and yet had some firmness to it, like a sandbag or something along those lines. And I remember I threw that up on the bench and threw a piece of tin on there. Quite honestly, it's probably like 14 gauge, because back in the day, a guy didn't have much less than 14 gauge laying around the shop. This would have been probably a lot easier to do in 20 gauge. Harder to weld on, but easier to curve. Anyway, I just threw that on that and just went ham on it with a hammer. Just really beat on her until I started getting that shape, and then I trimmed her down and hammered on her a little more until I really just kind of got the curve I want. And you can see like some of the hammer marks are still in there. I just kind of give her I ground the welds down and just give the rest just a few seconds with the old flapper wheel, and figured if I painted it, I'd just Bondo the rest. But I decided to let it rust, and I decided hammer marks were okay for this particular unit. And so that's just how I got that tank shaped that way. It took some patience. Built a little angle iron frame. These fenders, and I don't know, obviously miscalculated, and I think it got bent over the years, but I think the fenders, you can see I didn't fool around welding that on there. But I know I made the fenders too, and that's not an easy thing to do, fellas, if you haven't done it before. I believe, if I remember right, I took the piece of tin, and as you can see, it's 14 gauge. I think I rolled it a little bit, and I think I clamped it to a big socket, if I remember right. Clamped it up on each end on a big socket with a little bit of a lip sticking up over the top. And then I just very easily and slowly just rolled that edge over, just hammering on it. And if you've ever done this, or you're ever wanting to try this, it's challenging. It's possible. A lot of little hits is the key. a lot of little hits as opposed to a bunch of big ones, because you're shrinking that all the way along that lip. You're shrinking that down, and so you get too crazy with too many big hits and it's just hard to get her straight. But I've done this procedure quite a few times actually over the years, and a lot of little hits and a lot of patience, and just sit there and just rat-a-tat-tat on that until you get her the way you want. And then, like I told you before, this works. So I drilled all these holes in here for the water to come out, and I welded a little fitting there in the bottom of the tank, and got the water system up and running. And then also, it was kind of a last minute deal, this little bracket here. I actually had like a round fuel tank on there for years, and I don't know, evidently my tack weld broke or something, and I don't know, I think it got away from me when I moved here a few years ago. I don't know where it is right this minute. I had this really cool kind of brushed looking round fuel tank, and I just made it like out of a, I don't know, a little piece of pipe or conduit or something, and it also had the domed ends to it, just like a lot of fuel tanks would. And it was a cool little tank, and I might have to look for that at some point. Anyway, if you guys have any more questions now, drop a comment, let me know. Try to answer that. Unfortunately, these were done years ago, so kind of too late to film them for YouTube as the construction process was actually happening. But if you have comments, drop them. Let me see them. I'll try to answer. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I'm going to do the same thing for my Doppke customs and maybe a couple of my hot rods. I'll just kind of review the process of getting them built the way they are. Those will be coming out probably over the next month or so, just whenever I get a chance to film it. Appreciate you guys watching. Have a good day, and we'll catch you next time on Failure at Retirement. Thanks.